we can go later on back. So today I want to speak about Beethoven's later period. So now we have established quite nicely in the past weeks how classical composers really established very clear and defined forms for their various compositions. We have discussed the sonata allegro form. Last week we heard examples how disciplined all these composers of the classical period were following those. Oh, now Laura can hear. Oh, wonderful. But she cannot hear me. Oh, wow. That's strange. Mystery. But so I don't know what to tell Laura. Interesting. Let me quick. But in any case, we have kind of gotten an idea what guided classical composers like Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. But now we are almost with the late period of Beethoven, which often is called the third period. We are moving literally with one step towards the Romantic era. So before we start anything about the Romantic era, we have to talk about Beethoven's late period. So today, and here my slides don't even want to move forward. So again, complete. Oh, there it is. Very sluggish today. So there's a few second delay. So today we are discussing the three periods of Beethoven's creative phases. We particularly will focus on the last period, and his one of his favorite forms was the scherzo, and how he changed his way of rhythm in the late period. And one of his favorite composition forms in the late period became actually the string quartet. The string quartet in Haydn's days, in Mozart's days, still followed all the same form rules of the early classical period, the same like symphonies and the same like a solo concerto. The string quartet, the first movement, usually was in the sonata allegro form. The second movement was usually a slow movement. Third movement, often a minuet, and then the last movement, the finale movement, which was of course the fastest of the group. So in a way, string quartets were like a mini symphony. But you will see how that changes when we look at the late string quartets. The late string quartets includes, and I can give you the numbers of those opus numbers. So the late string quartets are opus 127. That was in E flat major, quartet number 12, composed in 1825. Then we have opus 130, was also composed in the same year. It's string quartet number 13. So 12, 13. Number 14 was composed the following year. And then something funny, often what happens, opus 132, you would think it's composed also in 1826. But no, it was composed 1825. So sometimes composers lied about when they composed works. That's how sometimes it's not also chronologically how they numbered their opus numbers. So opus 127, 130, 131, 132, 133, and 135 are all works for string quartets or small string orchestras, and those were works he wrote all in this late period of his. So we will, here you see an overview of all the different periods. So we have the early period until the 1800s, so he has just, he's still traveling between Bonn and excuse me now, family is coming. Let me close quick the door, otherwise we will be disturbed. So the first period is really a transitional period when he moves from Bonn to Vienna, and he's studying with Michael Haydn, and he is trying to live up to those great idols of Franz Joseph Haydn. And on his first trip to Vienna, he's even meeting Mozart. On the second trip, he arrives in Vienna to stay forever in Vienna. That's when Mozart already had passed away. So just to give you an idea time-wise how Beethoven fits in the picture in context with Haydn and Mozart. I brought you here one of the early works so you can kind of see the difference in and again, it's not working well. Doesn't let me switch. Just bear with me. It's very slow. Anything I do today, it's very, very slow. So we just need a lot of patience. It is working, but I don't know why it's very sluggish. So I would like to play for you just the beginning of Symphony Number 1, which many people disregard even as a symphony. Many musicologists for the longest time declared this was a time when Beethoven didn't yet had found his individual style, where all he's doing, he's just copying Haydn and Mozart's composition. I find quite too harsh of a judgment. Of course, we prefer his later works, but just to see the contrast between his first, second, and third period, I would like for you to hear just the beginning of his first symphony. And it's with Bernstein conducting, so enjoy. And I will leave the video on because everything is too sluggish today.
All guests have been muted. All guests have been unmuted.
So we just heard actually a very traditional exposition like we discussed in our last session. So two themes which are very different in character. They're really in contrast standing to each other. And right now just the repetition of the exposition started, and then we would have seen how Beethoven develops those two themes. So very unusual, nothing unusual really in this first period. Beethoven is literally showing his ability to follow those footsteps of Haydn and Mozart. Now the second period, that's when he is writing Eroica, is Symphony number 3, and that's the turning point when most musicologists and experts are agreeing that Beethoven has found this so typical individual style of his in the Fifth Symphony. The third period is really anything he composed between 1818 and 1827. The second period in his personal life is very much occupied by several things. One thing, he's starting to be aware that he's losing his hearing. He's attempting a lot of solutions, trying to find treatments, and none of them are working. He is desperate at times. He is considering for a moment suicide. And he retreats to an outside of Vienna to a small village, Heiligenstadt it's called, where he writes actually in I believe it's 1801 or 1803, his testament and his will. So, and that particular will we always call the Heiligenstadt Testament. And he later on writes that all that held him back was his art and his commitment to his art. So, and that's actually when he starts to be really one of the most creative composers of his time with works like the Eroica, the Fifth Symphony. He's very much influenced not just by Enlightenment ideas, but of course now by the French Revolution. In his personal life, he engages in a quite drastic battle with his sister-in-law for the custody of his nephew Karl, who was his brother's son. But in these years, he's very, very productive, and but he struggles first trying to conceal the fact that he's losing his hearing. But more and more, he cannot hide the fact in front of friends, and furthermore in front of Vienna. In the third period, it's literally a period where the last few years he was completely deaf, didn't hear anything, but continued composing. And the interesting thing is that his so rebellious style he developed really in the second period now becomes a more introspective, serene type of musical language. And so one of the examples is actually of the third period, a very, well, I will play in a moment one of the late string quartets. So when you want to get the most representative works of this last period of Beethoven are really his string quartets and his piano sonatas. And it makes sense because, yes, the Ninth Symphony is also part of this period, but that's a work standing literally by itself. The daily occupation of Beethoven were really what he had written for his aristocratic sponsors were the string quartets and his piano sonatas. So those are much more representative of what occupied him daily, and really how he expressed himself also on a daily basis. So he still keeps these very typical contrasts, which were in general contrast is a big overarching theme of the classical period. Contrast in dynamics, contrast, as we saw last week, in contrast in two themes in the sonata allegro form. But now in the last period, he already is starting to take more freedoms with those forms we discussed last week. And that becomes really the theme then of the 19th century. So 19th century composers, the Romantic composers, all they are occupied is for the next 100 years how to free themselves from these so rigid forms Haydn and Mozart and all the early classical composers had established. And in this freedom of form, he is mixing in a lot his spirituality, a lot of more gentleness we usually don't see in the middle period. And so that's just very unusual for a composer like Beethoven. He also doesn't follow anymore the usual movement plans because, well, solo concertos used to have always 3 movements. We have symphonies, which are 4 movements. We have, there were really rigid rules how many movements were to a particular type of work and genre. But now he again breaks this up, and we see shortly after Beethoven, Mendelssohn, who writes a work like which the octet of Mendelssohn has several more movements than a usual chamber music piece would have. Or the Summer Night Dream, again, is chamber music in an unusual format, even with an outer musical title referencing Shakespeare. So this is very much what's now starting to be paved literally by the Beethoven in his late period. And here, this is one of the string quartets he finished during the last year of his life, and that it was not even ever heard by him in his lifetime. It was premiered after he had passed away. Beethoven passed away in 1827, and so this was to commemorate the composer's death 1 year earlier. And it was performed in no other place than the Vienna Musikvereinssaal. And again, very unusual movement plan. So we had 4 movements. Originally was supposed to have 3. So here also what's unusual, how he starts. He starts with a slow movement. Usually we would have always an allegro, allegretto type of movement at the beginning. And the scherzo, if we have 4 movements, and we say string quartets have a little bit similarity with the symphony, the scherzo Beethoven usually in earlier periods used to put in the 3rd movement. So he doesn't follow anymore these rules. Well, 19th century we have Tchaikovsky who writes a symphony which ends on a slow movement. So all these rules are now not anymore kept so rigidly. So let me quick play you a beginning of this last string quartet by Beethoven, the 1st movement and then the 2nd movement. So just bear with me. Again, it's very slow, and here we go.
All guests have been muted. All guests have been unmuted.
So this was the very unusual first movement of this last string quartet by Beethoven. And as you see, just that this first time the theme is played, that it's played by the viola, is very unusual. Viola didn't have traditionally an importance in a string quartet. And then really the theme is thrown around between all the different instruments, almost making it like a polyphonic structure. And that's also not usually done in string quartets of that particular time. But it shows that in early years when when Beethoven was a student in Bonn, his teacher was actually teaching him the counterpoint and composition techniques of Johann Sebastian Bach and the other Baroque orchestras composers. So Beethoven, for example, thought very highly of Handel. He thought he was the greatest composer ever who had lived. And so here we see these great skills Beethoven had learned by studying Baroque composers. And he's applying this in his very last string quartet. The second movement is a very different in character. So it's much faster, triple meter. That's of course typical for a scherzo. In general, Beethoven replaced literally what used to be the spot of the minuet. He replaced by the scherzo. Both are in triple meter. Both have the ABA form. So in general, he followed those form rules, except that the scherzo is, of course, a little faster paced than a regular minuet. What now, since the Symphony 7, really Beethoven starts to play a lot with rhythmical motives. And that we see even following through in his last string quartet, 135. And so here, let me quick load this particular second movement. And again, with the Hagen string quartet. And here we go. Enjoy.
All guests have been muted. All guests have been unmuted.
So yeah, quite some surprises, and the ending I find very humorous. But what I referred to in my chat comment, so here there are many times these funny rhythms. You can tell when the violinists make these quite odd movements, it's actually helping them to keep the offbeats, because that's really what the syncopations are. And we do see, except the first violin, really three voices, the second violin, the viola, and the cello, who are playing what we call an ostinato. And here I did also copy for you the definition of ostinato. So it literally means in Italian stubborn. And it is just a motive or a phrase which is just repeated over and over and over. And it becomes really, I mean, some ostinato, it can be just one single bass note being held. So it can be just meaning that. But often it can be all just also a melody played or an accompaniment just repeated over and over. But now we look how it's changed. When I was trained in music in the beginning years in Germany, it was absolute sin to say ostinatos, and we would have been really reprimanded for it. So ostinati or shelly is now getting out of fashion, I guess. So that's very typical in the scherzo of the second movement. But also when we get to the string quartet in F, where I would like to show you some of the intricate parts of this particular string quartet. So here we have a little, let me see how I'm going to do this. So we have a little very simple A theme, and sometimes it's quite interesting how simple those themes in the late period of Beethoven can be. They were so plain and simple that sometimes his nephew even complained about that his uncle had gone senile, that he would just hum all day long these so plain childlike tunes. He especially thought that Ode to Joy from the Ninth Symphony was too plain and simple. So here let's hear the simple theme of the string quartet in F. So here we go, and I hope you can hear. I have to run this through my And as you can hear, constantly the same thing is moving really from one voice to another. And I don't know, here's my pointer. So first it's the upper voice playing the syncopated rhythm where you're always on the offbeat, you're never on the one. So that gives these jumping kind of joyful impression. And then from there the same motive is played again, but now it's by the viola and by actually the cello. So it just moves constantly, but it's always the same. And the accompaniment to it, it's also moving up now from the bass version. This is cello playing. Suddenly it's played by the first violin and by the viola. So very intricate changing from the very plain little theme. So syncopation, just as a definition, is a variety of rhythms, but the important part is that you are literally going against the pulse. Every time measure has its pulse, like a waltz goes, for example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So if I suddenly have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you see it almost feels like a rhythmical hiccup, and that's what a syncopation is. As we just saw here, the longest note is always, this is the second beat. So we have a 3/4 measure. It's 1, 2, 3. And so it just constantly changes. We do see that string quartets, there's always, it feels this syncopated note on that second beat. It seems like a wrong note, and always it seems like an interruption or disruption. Let me see. The third movement is now the movement where we see just many more lyricism. That's not very typical to have. Oops, I need to copy for a string quartet. So here, let me show you the third movement, which is so typical. The lyricism Beethoven suddenly has in his late period. He always had beautiful melodies in his slow movements, but he doesn't have the serenity than he has later in his final period. So here we go. Enjoy. Oh, that was taken off. All right. Let me take that. You see, that's what happened when, let me quick find another one. Here we go. Oh, that one either. Oh dear. So let me find another one. So 1 second, I have to load it. Oh, so window I didn't intend to play. So here we go.
All guests have been muted. All guests have been unmuted.
Beautiful movement, isn't it? So, yes, Joan, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very few songs. So really, this is the last period of his composition. Huge.
That's right. Yeah. So, and here we have one of Beethoven's friends talking about Beethoven. His talk and his action all formed a chain of eccentricity, in most parts peculiar, yet they all radiated a truly childlike amiability, carelessness, and confidence in everyone who approached him. Even his barking tirades are only explosions of his fanciful imagination and his momentary excitement. They are simply blustered out lightly, good-humoredly, the offspring of a mad, humorous mood. So, well, but that was Beethoven, and he. Many people are not very familiar with this late period of Beethoven, particularly the late string quartets. So I can actually send you a list of all of them, so you have a chance to look them up online. Do you have a question? No? Okay, so then this would be today my class of today. So we did look just briefly at the 3 different periods of Beethoven. So have a wonderful weekend, and I wish everybody a wonderful Thanksgiving. And there won't be any classes of community college, even if you take some other classes, not just my music classes, it's all community college. It's for next week. There are no classes scheduled for next week. So thank you for participating tonight, and have a great Thanksgiving. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Bye-bye.